If you've been training for a while and you feel like you're stuck, not that you're terrible or doing bad, but you just don't feel like you're improving as much as you were in the beginning, these might be a few reasons why this is happening. My name is Michael Boyer, and I'm the co-owner of Stonebelt Fightwear, a small Canadian family-owned business. I choose to talk about this subject because I've been a blue belt for quite a while now at this point, and I feel like I am currently kind of in this slump, or you could call it a plateau. I just feel like I'm on a treadmill and then, you know, I'm walking to nowhere. Sometimes it can get discouraging because we feel like we put the effort in, but we don't necessarily see the same type of progression that we saw at the beginning or at the very first year or very first few months that we start doing jiu-jitsu or any kind of training, martial arts, self-defense kind of course. There's a steep learning curve, so when you start and you realize that you're learning things, it's really good. It feels good, but then at some point you know enough, but you can't apply what you know as well as other people in the room yet, which makes for kind of of a tough situation because the effort is there for most people. I know I put in the effort, but the progress doesn't seem to be the same. So how do you deal with those plateau, and how do I deal with them myself? Well, I'm going to suggest that there's four things or four reasons, I guess, that we could look into. And the first one, I would say probably one of the biggest ones, is simply a lack of focus. I think what ends up happening at some point is we discover a lot of things. We discover new submissions pretty much every week, new ways to pass the guard, new ways to defend, new ways to get out of certain guards. And it becomes overwhelming because, we call it the human chest for a reason. It is a very rational type of martial art, and you're constantly thinking about what you're doing and how your opponent is going to react. So the more you know, the more sometimes you come almost to some sort of a mental blockage where you feel like you have too many options, and some of them you're not able to implement as well as you see in your mind. I know that happens to me quite a lot. So I know what I got to do, but my body is just can't do it. So that's where I think focus comes in, and I believe that even like high level athletes will usually give these types of advice, and I'm starting to try to follow it myself, and I see that it makes a difference. So let's say I know my guard is pretty bad, okay? I'm not a flexible guy in terms of jiu-jitsu, so I can't really invert well, and I gotta find creative ways as an older practitioner to try to slow down these young guns. And so when I've been going into training in the last few days, I'm trying to specifically address that issue. So I'm going to focus my roles and the rest of my training. Of course, I'm going to do like the drills and stuff like professor wants it to be done. But when I get into the roles, I try to focus on my guard play, my guard retention. So I don't focus so much on submitting guys, getting on top. Like these are things that I know that I can do better than actually playing my guard and not having people pass me all the time and having to get out of guards. So being focused in your training and trying to think, okay, what's one thing I can work on for the next like 2 weeks? Especially if you're going to the gym steady, this works really well. So you develop that mindset where you'll focus on one thing, and I promise you, I think by the end of those first few weeks where you focus on something, you'll realize that you got better at that thing. So a lot less people are passing your guard 2 months after you started intentional focus-based training. I think that's the first step to getting out of that kind of slump. It won't fix all your issues, of course. You'll still be overloaded with a lot of things when you're rolling, but at least if you can keep one thing in mind and improve a certain aspect of your game, then at least it lets you see that you have improvement in that category, and then it boosts, if nothing else, it boosts your morale and lets it shows you that you are progressing nonetheless. I would say that the second of my tips would be, stop trying to win every roll. If you're in a slump and you don't feel like you're progressing, it might actually be because you're being obsessed with tapping out everybody and winning the roll and making sure you're always on top, instead of prioritizing being in uncomfortable situations where you have to force yourself where you're actually bad, which means you have to let your ego at the door and you have to accept that you're probably going to lose most of the rounds because you're working on things that you're bad. And the truth is, a lot of people are not ready to do that, unfortunately. And it's too bad, because that's probably one of the best ways to learn. Focus-based training, and then not focusing on winning, but focusing on actually achieving that goal. So for me, as an example, I was saying that my guard is weak sauce. Let's be honest. So I have to put myself, that's the reason I've been always starting my rolls on the bottom. And I want to be there, not because it's fun, but because it forces me to try to defend those guard passes. Not only coming in the training with a focused mind on specific play, a specific playbook or frame of mind that you want to work on, but also coming with the frame of mind that you're not there to win everything. It's, first of all, like, training is not a competition. Even if you're trying to compete, you can't treat your training like it's always a competition, because that's not what it's for. That's exactly the reason why we have situational based training. And I think that even if you don't do a lot of situations, at least when you're rolling, make an effort to start in the position that you need to work on, and not be so focused on just winning. I mean, congrats. You won the Dad of the Night award for tapping out everybody in the gym. Now you got to go back to work tomorrow, and you're not really better than you were yesterday. So that, like, it's pointless to go to the gym and especially for a hobbyist like me. If you're just a hobby and you do jiu-jitsu because you like it, and really, like, I don't care if I win or lose every round. All I want is to get better. And I think that's really the key to the mindset that you need to have when you go into the gym and you're in a slump and you're trying to get out of a plateau. The third key, I would say, is that a lot of people might train with the wrong intensity. And I'm especially guilty of that. I'll be totally honest with you guys. In my case, I train too soft. And that's the truth, because I'm naturally a good guy. I don't, I don't look for trouble naturally. I guess the older I get, the grumpier I get. So I can tap into that a little better than when I was young. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but nonetheless, um, some people will really go way too hard, way too much all of the time. And that's not good either, because you're not taking the time to slow down and actually address the issues that you might have. And then you might be like me, where you're a good-hearted guy and or gal, and I know I've said this in other videos, but I started jiu-jitsu, I was almost 300 pounds, and still to this day, I'm still a heavy guy. I'm not as heavy as I used to be. because of jiu-jitsu. But in my mind, I still weigh 300 pounds, and I still treat my rolls like I weigh 300 pounds. So sometimes I won't put as much pressure as I should. I'll be way too nice. And it kind of hinders my training because I'm thinking too much of my training partner and not enough on improving myself. And I know this might sound a little bit selfish, but it's a fight sport. You need to be a little bit selfish. I'm not saying we need to hurt our partners. Of course, you want to take care of your partners and not hurt them. But there's a difference between having a low intensity, having too much intensity, and then that that middle range is pretty wide of like good enough intensity. If you see that your partner is able to follow you and you can roll with like for the 5 or the 6 minute roll and you're not like completely wasted, then you probably had a good rhythm. If you're both like tip top, no sweat, didn't break didn't even break your cardio, then you probably were way too smooth. And I think that middle ground is where you can find good training, where you have time to think, you have time to be focused, and you have the right intensity for training. And also, I would say in terms of intensity, if you're going to the gym once a week, training 3 hours, 4 hours, super, super, super intense, but then you're not going for the rest of the week, you're probably better off going twice less time. And if you can, even 3 times, and if you can, 4 times. Like, I think it's probably better for someone to go as much regularly as you can for shorter amounts of times than to go really, really hard for just once a week. That's my personal opinion. I'm sure a lot of people probably share it, and that's what I've noticed. And it's also easier to be disciplined when you're doing it that way and you're scheduling it in time for jiu-jitsu. Of course, I'm a dad of 3. I'm married. I'm building Stonebelt, my business. I'm working on the side. Like, I understand life busyness. I get it. But I still manage to go train like at least 3 times a week on most occasions. Now, illnesses happen, Christmas break, stuff happens, life is life. And sometimes you won't be able to train for a few days, a few weeks. But I'm sure if you've stopped training for any amount of time, you'll realize soon enough that everything goes down really fast. And then when you come back, it's much harder to start back the machine. Yes, it comes back pretty quickly usually, but it's always harder on the body. It seems to want to start the repetitions of jiu-jitsu after like a month off. It's terrible. I had to, because I was ill in the Christmas break, I had to stop for like almost 2 months. And now I've started doing it again, and the first weeks were painful. So if you can manage to be regular, to be steady, that's the best thing. Even if you're in a plateau, I promise you, if you're steady, you'll see growth eventually. Just persevere, give it enough time, and it'll come around. You'll see your growth at some point. That's inevitable. And I'm sure everyone that does jiu-jitsu or any kind of martial arts will tell you there's good days and there's bad days. Sometimes you'll go train and nothing freaking works. Nothing. As a pretty experienced blue belt, sometimes I'll listen to the professor, and I'll in my head I'm just like, yeah, I understand that thing, and I'll go do it. I'm like clueless. There's just those days where like I'm lost in my mind and things don't click. But at the same time, as frustrating as it is, we all have those days, and we have to push through them. Um, I mean, it's the same thing to have any sort of success in life, really. If you quit every time it's hard, I mean, you're gonna be a quitter. There's not an easy, soft way to say it. Quitters quit. And then I would say the fourth thing is give it enough time and consistency, which really ties back into what I just said about intensity. But give it enough time. Like a lot of people get discouraged because after a month or two, especially like newer blue belts, like they get that blue belt and like 3-4 months in, they start getting smashed by everyone in the gym because nobody's going soft on them anymore, and they get really discouraged, and that a whole blue belt blues comes in. And it's a real thing. I've been there. I've felt discouraged at times, but once you are able to persevere, I think really discipline helps a whole lot. And once you go past that point, then you're happy you stayed, and you persevered through the harder times and through the plateaus when you don't feel like you're successfully implementing what you would like on the mats. So be forgiving of those bad days and just stay consistent with your training, stay disciplined. And I think those are the 4 keys that you can try to implement, which are really simple, and they don't require any special power or any special skills as an athlete. They just require discipline and a focused and intentional way of looking at your jiu-jitsu journey. Small adjustments can make a world of difference, and the reality is, if you stay on the mats long enough, you'll eventually see the results. Have a good evening.
Forged under pressure, worn with honor. Join the movement, subscribe, and follow Stonebelt.